OK. Bienvenue tout le monde à la rencontre régulière du 10 février 2025. Welcome everybody to the regular meeting of February 10th, 2025.
Oui, parfait. Alors, nous allons ouvrir la session avec les présences. Donc, je confirme que tous les membres du Conseil sont présents. Alors, est-ce qu'il y a des additions ou modifications à l'ordre du jour ce soir?
J'aimerais avoir une discussion pour, j'ai bien vu, là, pour l'association des hockey mineurs. Ils n'auront plus le droit à des dons. J'aimerais en voir comment discuter un petit peu.
OK.
Parfait. Ça, c'est la politique de dons. Parfait. On va le retirer du consent, si je ne me trompe pas. Non, OK, parfait. Fait qu'on va pouvoir avoir la discussion au moment... Parfait. Alors, pour l'ordre du jour, qu'il soit résolu que l'ordre du jour soit accepté, incluant les modifications apportées, séance tenante le cas échéant, proposée par
Oui.
M. Faure, qui est appuyé par Mme Drolet.
Tous d'accord? OK.
Parfait. Alors, nous allons commencer avec la présentation de Citywide concernant le Asset Management Plan. Donc, Mme Langlois-Case va nous confirmer une fois qu'il est disponible et sur l'écran. Oui, OK, parfait. Tu peux y aller. Je vais le mettre sur la grosse écran.
Puis juste en attendant, no disclosure of pecuniary interest, on était de bon. OK.
Merci.
On peut nous noter. Son nom, c'est Michael, c'est ça?
Wait, I think he can begin, seeing as we see him at least on the small computer until...
Michael, can you hear us, or?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
We can't hear you.
Okay. I'm just
there we
looking
go.
to be able to share my screen. It looks like I need permission there.
Julie, peux-tu lui donner permission de partager son écran?
Ah, here we go.
There we go.
Ah, je vais être...
Perfect.
Okay, can you see that screen?
Yes.
Very good. Oh. Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for having me today. My name is Mike Bly, and I'm an asset management advisor here with PSD Citywide, and I've been the primary consultant working with the nation and their staff, your staff, to develop the 2024 asset management plan. With me today on the call is Senior Advisor Alexa Wild. So first, before I jump right into it, I just want to take a moment and thank the staff so far for their cooperation, dedication, energy, and effort working through this process. Building an AMP can be a very tedious project. There's a lot of data finding missions and knowledge transfer, knowledge sharing that needs to be had. So I want to thank staff for their time so far. Today I'll be reviewing at a high level the updates that have been made for this iteration of the asset management plan for 2024. And with this, it is 2024 compliant as per the OREG requirements, 58817. Okay, so the nation and PSD have been working together on developing a 2024 OREG compliant plan. We started this process, this project back in June of 2024. The 2024 AMP focuses primarily on current levels of service. And the second phase of the project will be the development of a 2025 AMP, which will take place, we'll be starting that as early as this week or into the next. And that plan focuses on proposed levels of service as per the July 1st, 2025 OREG requirements. And I just want to point out, I mentioned a thank you for all the staff, but I want to point out specifically Nadia and Alexander for their work so far on this project. So why the need for municipal asset management? We acknowledge that municipal infrastructures are vital for communities. And from our perspective, we need a way to organize what we own. We need a way to understand what services we provide through those assets. And we need a way to ensure accountability to our residents and stakeholders for the services they use. So these three key objectives, this is the driving force behind, of course, not only the regulation, but also about increasing awareness among various stakeholders on the need for sound asset management practices. So from a municipal perspective, so what does asset management involve? So it's a coordinated activity of an organization to realize value from its assets. So the value is a level of service we are providing. So you as municipality, that you're providing to your residents. A high level set of parameters that we can use to determine the level of service of a particular system or network here on the screen. So when we think about asset management, what are we trying to do? We have a level of service that has been defined, and we're trying to manage and balance the cost, performance, and risk of that asset. So the cost, how much will it cost the municipality to replace, repair a given asset? When will this cost be required? How do we plan for that? Performance. What is the current output or performance of the asset? Is it in poor shape? Is it in good shape? Is it functioning as intended and suitable for the service demand that it is set up to meet? And what are the risks? What is the potential risk of this asset failing? Who will be impacted? And is the municipality able to identify these high-risk assets? So if you increase or decrease any of these parameters, cost, performance, risk, it has an impact on the others. For example, spending less money in a particular asset category may result in increased risk of failure or a decrease in performance. If you're looking to reduce risk, the cost may increase. So it's about trying to find the balance between these three parameters. So why are we here? We're OREG 58817 compliance. So OREG has defined requirements for 3 AMP iterations, the first of which was July 1st, 2022, and included measuring current levels of service, asset inventory analysis, current performance of assets, life cycle activities, and cost to maintain those current levels of service. So what do we do to the asset? When do we do it? And what is it costing us? And the impact of growth that there may be on the current levels of service. 2022 focuses on core assets, and in 2024 we added in the non-core assets. Core assets, of course, referring to roads, bridges, stormwater, sanitary, and the non-core buildings, fleet, machinery, equipment, land improvements. So with the completion of this AMP, the municipality has achieved full compliance with the 2024 requirement. And then we will start shortly here working on the July 1st, 2025 requirements, proposed level of service. So we'll look at the current levels of service, any proposed increases, decreases, are we maintaining, understanding where the municipality is at and where they might want to make any adjustments. What are the associated life cycle activities and costs to achieve those defined levels of service? And with that, of course, we'll have an updated financial strategy, take a further look into the impacts of growth. So what comes after the 2025 iteration of the AMP? The regulation requires that all AMPs be updated once every 5 years. That council conduct an annual review of its asset management progress on or before July 1st. And then the asset management policy and plan be posted to the municipal website. So asset management plan 2024, based on 2023 year end. So the 2024 compliant AMP was developed based on the inventory as of December 31st, 2023. So it doesn't currently take into account any 2024 costs or activities that may have been carried out. This presentation will provide an overview of the current state of municipal infrastructure, provide recommendations to increase confidence in analysis and decision-making, and we'll look at the municipality's financial capacity to meet the long-term capital requirements. All right, so jumping into the data now. So hopefully everyone's had a chance to have a look at the full document. The intent here is to highlight, I guess, the high-level information. So staff and PSD have worked hard to refine the asset inventory over the last few months, which is housed within Citywide, to ensure that the AMP provides a realistic and accurate representation, as best we can today, of the current state of the infrastructure. So this included reviewing and updating replacement costs where available of each asset category. And the result of that is, as you see on the screen here, here's your core and your non-core assets with a total replacement value of $411 million. Your sanitary sewer network making up the majority of that, coming in at just over $89 million. So your sanitary water, bridges and roads, your core assets making up the top four highest value assets. When we look at replacement cost, this slide here is intended to show you where these costs came from, how they were calculated. So this lists out each asset category. And so the primary replacement cost for each asset category was CPI. So typically we look at, so there's a range of methods to determine replacement cost. Some are more accurate and reliable than others, of course. And this AMP relied on two, user-defined cost or cost per unit. So these costs are based on costs provided by staff, typically, which could include average costs from recent contracts, recent projects, data from engineering reports, if you had any studies completed that provided those costs, staff assessments and estimates based on their knowledge and experience with your infrastructure. In the place of user-defined costs, we look at using CPI. So the historical cost of the asset is inflated to current day dollars, or the most recent replacement cost if it was available. Of course, using the consumer price index or the non-residential building construction price index. So user-defined costs are based on reliable sources, right? Are reasonably accurate and reliable way to determine replacement costs, preferred way to determine replacement costs. So as I mentioned, cost inflation is used where we may not have defined costs available, or we deem them not reliable. And it is a reliable method for newer or recently purchased assets or newly constructed assets. However, as assets age, new products, technologies become available, cost inflation becomes a less reliable method and often understates the value. So as you can see, the majority of asset categories relied on inflation. This results in an opportunity for improvement to review these replacement costs and determine if user-defined replacement costs can be realized. So, and the accuracy of and reliability of lifecycle costs is critical for asset management. And so the more we can get these user-defined costs and integrate them, the more accurate these reports and projections will become. So looking at the asset portfolio as a whole, this graph breaks down the current condition of assets. This is the distribution of asset condition by asset category, weighted by replacement cost. And collectively, 73% of the assets are considered in fair or better condition. Now that's 73%, so looking at the replacement cost, not the actual quantity of assets. So where do we derive this condition from? So the condition of assets relies on both age-based and field condition data, so assessed condition. This chart displays the percent of asset that had condition assessments applied and the source of that assessment. Overall assessed condition data was available for 92% of the assets, primarily based on internal or staff knowledge. For the remaining portfolio, where assessed condition was not available, age-based was used as an approximation of condition. So age-based condition typically overstates needs and overall deficit. We build assets, we construct assets, we buy assets, we maintain them. And so age doesn't necessarily mean they're old and bad and need to be replaced. So condition assessments are valuable in providing the true state of that asset. And assessed condition data builds confidence in decision making. So again, on the assess condition, assess condition is data is used in asset management decision-making to mitigate risk associated with asset failure, to identify the most economic intervention, and to accurately predict future expenditure requirements. So as I said, just because it's old doesn't mean it needs to be replaced. It could be functioning very, very well, and maybe that life can be extended and that replacement isn't needed. So they are very important for accurately predicting the future expenditures. So the forecasted capital requirements. So having defined replacement costs, condition of assets, identifying life cycle activities, and a long-term capital forecast was developed, as you see here. These include both asset rehabilitation and replacement requirements. The graph identifies requirements over the next 80 years. So why do we use 80 years? So this projection is used as it ensures that every asset has gone through a full life cycle iteration of replacement. And so what we see here is, so because it's over 80 years, we put it in 5-year blocks to make the graph look a little bit better. To take note here, this red dotted line indicates the average annual requirement. So although we're showing 5-year blocks, that $11.6 million value is the ideal amount that should be allocated on an annual basis from your taxes, from your rates to fund the asset requirement. And it's important to keep in mind that this is just looking at taxes and rates and sustainable funding offerings. So that being said, we know that there will be other funding opportunities that become available, of course, over the years. We just can't predict what those will be. So we just look at those sources for the purposes of this planning. So we look at this plan and strategy with the mindset of funding requirements without access to, one-time grants, one-time sources of funding. All right, so financial strategy recommendations. So when we break it down, we break it into tax-funded assets and we break it into rate-funded assets. So when we look at the annual capital requirement in your current infrastructure deficit, tax-funded assets have an annual capital requirement of just shy of $8.5 million. Current funding available, 3.1, creating an annual capital deficit of 5.4 million. So with those calculations, you're 37% funded of your requirement. Water rate funded, 1.6 million annual capital requirement, 388,000 funding available. Sanitary, 1.5 million annual capital requirement, 275,000 available. So respectively, water, you're 24% funded, sanitary, 19% funded. So the municipality is committing approximately 3.8 million towards capital projects per year from sustainable revenue sources, which include CCBF, formerly the gas tax, OSIF, tax allocation reserves. The average annual requirements for both tax and rate funded assets continue to provide the current level of service, totaling approximately 11.5 million. So resulting in an annual deficit of roughly $7.7 million. So as I mentioned just a bit ago, so put differently, the assets are currently funded at 37% of their long-term capital requirements. So when we look at these numbers, from a common question that gets asked is how does this compare with other municipalities? Where do we kind of sit on there? So when we look at these numbers, from our experience discussing this with other advisors, we would say that this is right on average with what we're seeing, that 30 to 40% funded rate. So we would say it is in line with the average. And just to remind, this funding is from capital, is for capital only, and looks at taxes and rates and other sustainable sources, and does not account for one-time grants or funding that may have been utilized. So just when we see funding available, 275 and 388, this is what came from your rates. It doesn't mean that other money wasn't spent in those categories. It just wasn't considered a sustainable funding source, perhaps. Okay, so annual capital requirement versus available funding is another way to look at kind of how the deficit comes to be. The blue indicating the annual requirement, and kind of that peach color indicating the funding available, what has been spent. Now, there are a few categories here that see a $0 indicated. This is calculated based on the last 3 years of spending. So it doesn't mean that nothing has been spent on these categories. It just means in that 3-year period, there wasn't a capital investment made from these sources of funding. So what should the municipality be spending? Here, this graph breaks it down category by category. The blue showing the target rate. So if we look at roads, the target rate is 4.9% of the asset portfolio, currently funded at 3.22, so very, very close. And overall, for the entirety of the asset portfolio, the target reinvestment rate at 2.81%, and the actual reinvestment rate for the period we looked at 0.92%. So what does this mean? So the target reinvestment rate refers to the annual capital requirements as a percentage of the total replacement cost of that asset. While the actual reinvestment rate, of course, looks at the annual capital funding available as a percentage of the replacement cost. And so the intent is to show the funding gaps clearly. All right, so achieving full funding. So we have an annual or a deficit identified and that gap identified. How do we close that gap and achieve full funding? This slide breaks it down category by category. These percentage increases are the recommended percentage increases to achieve full funding in the respective categories. The slide on the right, I'll break that down a little bit more. So the water network, looking at it, recommending a 92% increase, and sanitary 115% increase. I know those are big numbers, but I'll break it down in 1 second here. So how do we look at those numbers? So the recommendation would be for the tax-funded assets. Sorry, let me back up. So based on the current infrastructure deficit, it is recommended that tax-funded assets see an increase of 2.2% annually over the next 15 years. Water rates an increase by 3% annually, and sanitary by 3.9%. And water and sanitary, the recommendation is 20 years being a higher number there. So achieving that over a 20-year period instead of a 15. So, and this is solely for the full purpose of phasing in full funding to these categories and eliminating that infrastructure deficit. So it's important to note that these numbers do not factor in one-time grants again, or what's considered non-sustainable sources of revenue. Of course, those sources will be essential when they're available to make investments into the infrastructure. So also when we look at these numbers, it's also important to note that the calculation represents values in the value of today's dollar. It doesn't account for inflation. It doesn't take into account growth projections. Inflation can be looked at on an annual basis, specifically for the nation within the software and whatnot. You can apply inflationary factors as you learn them. So if you know what the inflation is, you can apply that and look at those reports on an annual basis. For us to provide numbers using inflation over a 15-year, 20-year, 50-year projection would be very difficult to do with any degree of accuracy or confidence. So these are difficult to predict with a high level of confidence. So recommendations and next steps. So it is recommended to continue to review and refine the asset inventory. This is crucial in consultation with internal departments, stakeholders, internal stakeholders, public stakeholders. It was recommended that a portfolio-wide data governance strategy be implemented. And the reason for this is to increase accuracy and confidence in data. And what that would do is provide action to your asset management program, where these values, strategies, condition assessments, replacement costs, et cetera, are being looked at on a regular set frequency to be kept as current as possible. And what this will do, this will only increase the confidence in the data as it's refined. Reviewing all estimated useful lives. quite often you have financial policies, your TCA policies that defines a useful life, which is used for your financial reporting purposes, amortization, depreciation, etc. Reviewing this policy and comparing that to the actual useful lives of an asset, they quite often can vary. So reviewing that and seeing if there can be an alignment brought in between those two. Item number 2 there, OREG 588 2025 requirements is upcoming. So we'll work on the 2025 here, as I mentioned shortly. We'll start looking at proposed levels of service, and we'll develop a strategy to benchmark the levels of service to determine what are those appropriate values. And continuous improvement. Asset management is not a one and done. A document is printed, it is read, and it's put on the desk, and but it's a continuous process of refinement and validation, understanding what you have and what it's worth and the condition it's in, so we can accurately keep refining this data to have a higher confidence in the accuracy. And to do that, we recommend working into the budget, your capital operating budget, to include funding for the assessment of the municipality's assets, identifying funding to support, provide the resources needed to continue this work that's been done, and of course using that to update future iterations of this AMP. And I think with that, it's a very high level, fairly quick overview, and I would welcome any questions if there are any.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for that scary report. I'll open up the floor for any councillors that want to poke away at having any questions.
Just a reminder to return on your mics and shut them off after, because people at home will hear in double.
And just out of curiosity, do you understand French? If the question is asked to you in French, would you be able to answer in English or no?
Unfortunately, I do not.
Okay, so then we'll adjust here. Okay.
Straightforward.
It's pretty straightforward. The only, I see some percentages there. Like when you're suggesting it's 2.2%, and that's just some money set aside without our operational or any capital. Like it's just literally to maintain the current assets that we have.
Yeah, so the 2.2% doesn't include any operation. We're just strictly looking at capital. And this is an increase to fund the replacement, right?
Right.
So if you do nothing and spend 0.9% increase, the assets will just deteriorate, right?
Mm-hmm.
This 2.2% is just end of life replacement.
Okay. And that's not like, let's say we buy something new and we add to our assets, and after that, then that could change, right? The 2.2 is just it's a floating number.
That's correct. Yeah. So the number it's just for what you have now. It doesn't account for any future acquisitions or purchases or construction, anything like that.
Right. And again, our current right now, we're actually $7.8 million behind every year.
Correct. That's the current deficit, 7.8 million of what the future requirements are.
Right. And just out of curiosity, can I ask, our total budget that we pick up in taxes is about what, 15 to 17 million or something like that?
About 14 and a half,
So
14.6 million.
yeah, so that's about 50% of our current tax rate. Okay, just you can see where it's scary for us. Okay, wait.
Yeah, so that 2.2% you said is that's based on the actual dollar value of today. It's not taking into account inflation rate. So when we review it every year before 1 July, what happens to that 2.2%? Let's say, for example, we have a 1.5% inflation rate. How much, what would that do to that 2.2%? Because that's an annual tax rate increase?
That's right. Yeah. So the 2.2% is an annual tax increase to get you to that 30, or that, to fund that difference over 15 years, right? So hopefully in 15 years, in today's dollars, you would be at full funding.
Right.
So what the actual dollars would be with a 1.5%, we'd have to do that math. But that's something you can review annually, right? So if you update all the replacement costs in citywide to account for that increase, these reports can be rerun and then that new percentage calculated.
Yeah, but just for an example, if we have, say, in 1 year, we have a 1.5%, or say, to make even numbers, say we just have a 1% inflation rate, would that change that 2.2% to 3.2%, or what? How much would that change? Like, do we need for that 2.2 to change to whatever? Does just a simple 1% inflation rate in 1 year have an implication on that number, or is it,
I think
say,
it's not-
after
yeah.
a couple of years?
I think I can answer that question. There's so many variables that they can't predict, right? Because right now, for example, like there's a lot of our equipment is coming out of the U.S. Well, our Canadian dollar is being devalued, so we're going to have to spend more money to get that equipment that is only bought in the States. It's very hard to predict that, right? So I think you put as many variables as you can, and that's where you came up with the 2.2. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, the 2.2 is strictly based on
Today's values,
value, right?
right.
And whatever life cycle activities you may have identified.
Right.
Like whatever activities, like a road, if you're going to do, mill and paves and overlays, those types of things, if those are identified in a strategy, accounts for those costs. Yeah, but there's so many variables that, like you say, we couldn't bring all those in and have a confident number.
Right.
Like, they constantly in flux.
Yeah, like I'm just giving you one variable. For example, we got to buy a new fire truck there in a couple of years, and it's only stuff that we can buy in the U.S. So if our dollar goes down, that means that we have to spend more money to purchase that truck. So you can't predict those variables. So I mean, it's a loose number at 2.2%. It may go up in 1 year, it may go down the next, but I think this is an average at today's cost.
That's correct. Yeah.
Are coming in because presumably as inflation goes up, so does your property values. So this number, what I would recommend is, of course, update your data every year or as often as you can that is reasonable. With the Ontario Regulation 58817, they are requiring, after the 2025 iteration is completed, you have to update your AMP every 5 years. So it's a target. So if you're going to follow the asset management plan recommendations, I would recommend stick with the recommended tax increase for that period of time, redo your AMP every 5 years, and look at what is your most recent spending that's going to take into account what you've recently been collecting for taxes and what you've been allocating towards your assets, and the most recent replacement cost, your most recent dollar compared to the U.S. Your example just recently about if you're purchasing equipment from the States, it's very, very dependent on that dollar. And then look at your trajectory and maybe If you're completely on track and this 2.2% over 15 years, technically in 5 years, your asset management plan should say, great, keep up with the 2.2%, but you only need it for another 10 years to reach your goal. Or it might have changed based on adding new assets to your inventory, of building new facilities, downsizing some services. Many things can change in 5 years. So at this point, in a long-winded way of saying is our recommendation is take this with a grain of salt because so many factors change on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, I think the number one tool to offset some of these things is just growth, right? I think that's what there's a more like the more we grow and the more we grow the tax base, I guess, then we can offset some of those future costs that way. Any other questions? D'autres questions?
Well, is that mean the people who use the water and sanitary is going to be, excuse me, 3.9 plus 3 plus 2.2? That's the value, right?
They wouldn't necessarily stack on top of each other
No.
Because you're not increasing the sanitary rate by 2.2%. It's a separate fee, right? So it's not that person would see.
C'est 3% sur ceux du water.
D'autres questions, commentaires?
Yeah, I've a question, and I'm not sure if you guys have been through this process yet, but what has your experience been once you've gotten into the stage 3, the report that's due in 2025, further in-depth report? In your experience, has this generally caused the 2024 or the step 2 report to increase from a 2.2? After you go through the step 3, do you see an increase in that number generally, or a decrease, or is it just depends on what gets decided?
If you don't mind, Mike, I'll jump in. It's very dependent. So the 2025 recommendations could be more, could be less, very much depends on the desires of the stakeholders through the AMP development.
And as far as the perspective of the province, when they're looking at that, now that we have this document and we know what's recommended, if council doesn't adopt that, now is there a risk that we're running that the province may not want to give us grant money, or may very well say, well, you're not really you're not following the recommended asset management plan. Like, is there a risk of that we're running that we may fall, I guess, victim to maybe not getting grants, or the province saying that, well, you're not funding your own assets, why should we, type of idea, right?
So it's more of a tool in the toolbox for counselors, less than a mandatory roadmap that you must follow.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just a few comments. This is a snapshot in time. This is where we are now. This plan is to maintain the current level of service. If we want to maintain the current level of service, we should be going up this amount of money. Now, growth is fantastic. It helps pay, but with growth comes added assets. So when you're taking a subdivision on, you're taking new roads, new sidewalks, and that's why it's really important to think, when you're thinking long-term, is every little piece that we're adding to this comes with a long-term cost. As well, if this is extreme and we don't want to see huge tax increases like this, then we have to reduce the level of service, which means getting rid of assets so that it's not as impactful. So that's one thing I want to mention. The other thing I want to mention is a lot of this information was not based on condition assessments. It was best guess, right? So we know that there's a lot of this information that is probably already outdated, that will need to be updated as we do. Like, we're in this year's budget, we have a contract we'll be giving out for road assessments, so we get a clear, precise picture of the condition of our roads. So with time, as we get more definitive data, that will help improve our asset management plan moving forward. That being said, I think everybody here understands l'envergure of asset management. Currently, with the HR plan, we put 0.5 employee for asset management. I anticipate in the future asking for a full-time person dedicated to this, because we're seeing a lot of municipalities. It's not just one person, it's 2-3 people that are dealing with the asset management of a municipality. If we want proper data moving forward and make data justified decisions in where we're going to need the resources to be able to stay on top of this. So that's where, ideally, when you look at the plan, the first thing on top is a strategic plan. That's where we're starting the process next week. So that'll help launch the discussions on levels of service. I think that's what it's going to come down to. Can we continue being everything for everyone? I think everybody in their own household budget agrees that you can't be everything for everybody. You have to be able to concentrate on certain things and make tough decisions. And that's why council is here, to make those difficult decisions. But I think looking back historically at where we are, if we had been increasing 1% a year extra for the last 10 years, we wouldn't be at 2.2% today. We might be at 1% or 1.2%. So it's really a long game, talking 20, 30 years out. It's just, the reality is we're faced with this decision today and the situation we're at. So this plan is a good starting point. but it's a document that is a living document that will continuously need updating. And it's not just one person in charge, it's a whole team effort to make sure we have that mindset of thinking asset management moving forward. Merci.
Well, thank you very much for your report. I think that concludes our questions or our comments. I'm not sure if our treasurer wants to say anything or.
I just want to thank PSD for preparing the presentation. And the asset management plan was circulated to council, I think, a week ago. So the plan was to come back on February 24th with a report for council. And if council is ready, we can adopt the 2024 asset management plan so that it can be then sent to the province as well as published on our website so that we fully comply with the provincial requirement. And we've already started working on the 2025 asset management plan as well. So that will come through later this year.
Perfect. Okay, thanks, everybody.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, before we move on to the next, we just want to close the Zoom and ensure the sound is working properly. When I switched it back to the council view, it seems like sound cut for a moment. So we just want to make sure that everything is back to normal. Tu m'as dit quand t'es prêt. Oui. So we're just going to do a quick test once it's switched back. The Zoom. Mm-hmm. Did you want to do just a quick recap of the question period that we had? Yeah. My mic was on this whole time. Okay, so we're back to normal. Okay, so I don't know if you can just go over quickly the questions that were just a brief overview for people at home
sure.
and the answers received.
Oh my goodness, I think there. So it comes down to 2.2 is a target. It's not written in stone. That's where with today's cost of where we are going with our assets. This number at 2.2 is also it is subject to inflation. It's subject to our Canadian dollar going up or down, so it's a floating number that needs to be revised yearly. But this is the target going forward for this year and following year, probably. We have an annual deficit of 7.8 million per year. When you look at that, as presently speaking, it's almost half of what we pick up in taxes yearly that we're already falling behind. Is there anything else that I'm missing? Est-ce qu'il y a d'autres choses que j'ai pas mentionnées?
Peut-être le fait que, dans le fond, c'est une façon d'être plus responsable, de suivre ça comme qu'ils ont expliqué. Si on le suit puis on prend ces recommandations-là, ben on risque pas de se retrouver à un moment donné avec quelque chose d'urgent à remplacer, puis on n'a pas les fonds qui viennent de la province. Donc là, il faut prendre des décisions encore plus difficiles. C'est ça. C'est de prévoir.
Je pense que c'est une bonne manière de gérer une municipalité. Écoute, là, ils font pas ça pour nous faire mal. C'est juste que on n'a jamais eu la vision de regarder 30, puis 40 ans, puis 50 ans en avant. Puis c'est quelque chose qui va nous aider pour y aller de l'avant. Je ne sais pas si vous avez entendu que c'est que M. Leroux, mais je peux-tu demander à le répéter un peu plus ou moins ce que tu avais à dire?
Je
là?
pense que je l'ai remis en temps, là.
OK.
Oui.
OK, good.
Je veux juste ajouter, Monsieur le Maire. I think, just to point out, this is, as you say, it's something that's fairly new in the sense it was really in 2015 that they sort of launched this approach. It's not something that, has been happening for 30, 40 years, this long-term thinking. I think if we go back enough in history, if you go back 50 or 60 years, the province are the ones who paid all their bridges and large culverts. They're the ones who paid for the community centers. And at some point in time, they just downloaded this to municipalities without giving us the funding to replace these assets one day. And that's where the situation we find ourselves in, is that we have a lot more responsibilities than we did in the past. And the municipality will have to deal with the current situation. So I think there's, as I said before, it's a living document. There's, it's going to change as we do condition assessments, and we try and stay on top of this. But it is challenging. A lot of municipalities, as they said, are in the same boat. It is, it's not something new, but we have to understand that if we're not putting enough money aside for our assets, that's going to affect our assets in the future. And it's okay that we don't, as long as we know what the risk of not investing is, right? So I think that's where the challenge is as elected officials is, you know, you have to think not only short term, but you got to think long term, and we got to think generations out, not, you know, 3, 4, 5 years out. So.
OK. Est-ce qu'on peut...
Oui, alors, c'est bien, nous pouvons juste peut-être passer le consent item et ensuite aller à M. Gingras pour la présentation prévue à 5h30. Est-ce que ça vous va?
Oui.
Oui, alors parfait. Donc, est-ce qu'il y avait des items sous le item par consentement que vous voulez retirer pour discussion? Donc, c'était les comptes payables, les procès-verbaux de la South Nation, résolution pour le RCIF pour l'ARENA, donc pour demander les côtés unis pour des fonds, le rapport sur le surintendant de drainage, ainsi que une mise à jour pour l'octroi que nous avons reçu pour les communautés inclusives. Donc, tout est beau. Qu'il soit résolu que tous les items énumérés sous 7 items par consentement soient reçus et approuvés tels que présentés, proposés par Mme Drolet et M.
C'est ça, Mme Drolet et M. Stewart. Parfait. Tous d'accord? Parfait. Sont adoptés.
Parfait. Alors, est-ce que M. Gingras, vous êtes prêt? Oui, je peux vous aider à placer. Il faut juste appuyer sur le bouton pour allumer le micro une fois que vous êtes prêt.
Bonsoir et bienvenue.
Bonsoir à vous tous. Merci de me recevoir ce soir pour vous présenter une pétition de la part des résidents de la Nation. Je vais la faire en anglais, mais si jamais vous voulez poser des questions en français, il n'y a pas de problème. Je suis bilingue, en partie en tout cas. So, dear Council and Nation staff, before I start, I want to present myself. I'm Stephen Gingras. I live in St. Albert, and I've also served our country for 28 years as a military member. I've moved 6 times in my military career, and I've been part of 6 different municipalities. I've paid taxes in 6 different municipalities. The highest increase I've ever had is 6%. So you can imagine the shock when we got 9.51% this year. I fell off my chair, okay? So on the 29th of February, we provided the clerk with a copy of an e-petition signed by 438 Nation residents. As of today, the total signatures have reached 1,233 signatures. What I need to point out is that 795 signatures had to be removed because of incomplete personal data. So when people fill it out, they didn't put in either their postal code or their town where they're from or their phone number. So I couldn't present that to follow the petition acceptance rules. We can, however, tell you that many of the names removed were household names of the region, like Brisson, Ouimet, Landry, Bourgeois, Laverne, Canel, Adam, and many more. So I could very clearly identify that there were people from our region, okay? So I would actually propose that it's at least been signed by at least 1,200 residents, plus minus a couple in there that didn't make sense or were people that we couldn't recognize their names. So the purpose of this petition is to demonstrate clearly that we, the residents, are not in agreement with the considerable rise in overall taxes of 9.51%, residential taxes, not including the water and sewer charges. The budget outlines several reasons for these increases, the primary being inflation of around 23% over the past 3 years. Residents are well aware of this inflation, since we've also suffered these increases in our daily lives, in addition to a doubling of our heating costs and foods. What we as residents deplore the most is that the nation had no long-term budget plan, being well aware that inflation took place each fiscal year for the past 3 years. And despite this, waited until 2025 to make us, to quote the mayor, bite the bullet. All at once. That is unacceptable and very disrespectful towards us residents. This situation raises some significant concerns by the residents as to the ability of this council and CAO to properly forecast expenses and to apply a progressive tax increase that can be sustained by residents. Had a progressive increase in taxes by 1 or 1.5% been done annually, we would not be in this unsustainable situation. This is quite a bullet to swallow by residents who are already significantly financially strained by ongoing inflation. We expect that Council will recognize the significant financial strain and impact this sudden tax increase has caused. We implore you to find more cost-saving solutions for all taxpayers to reduce this tax burden and strongly consider applying a progressive, longer-term taxation scheme. To be specific, what we're requesting is that you forego any salary increases for the council and municipal employees for 2025 and 2026 to demonstrate to residents that you're also prepared to make sacrifices to lower the taxation impact. The council consider postponing certain non-essential projects until next year or year after. The council continue to consider cuts on non-essential expenditures and services as required. That 2 members of council reconsider their position and propose and second a motion for council to rescind the 2025 budget resolution and that a recorded vote be held. The council then direct administrative staff to revisit the budget to find more cost savings and efficiencies. That the nation municipality initiate and develop a clear and publicly consulted long-term plan that outlines clearly expected costs and projects in order to apply a progressive taxation strategy. Lastly, will the mayor commit to forward these points to council for discussion in the next meeting? Essentially, we, the residents, don't want any further unsustainable surprises of tax increases. Thank you for listening and hearing us today. The rest is in your capable hands. I'm available for any questions you might have.
Okay, thank you. I don't have any questions. Est-ce qu'on a des questions, commentaires?
Oui, peut-être. J'aimerais juste vous remercier d'être ici ce soir. J'apprécie ce que vous avez fait. C'est certain qu'on a eu beaucoup de résidents dans le mois de décembre quand le budget a été approuvé. Je pense dans certains quartiers. Je sais que dans le quartier 5, quartier 6, c'était énorme. Beaucoup de résidents qu'on a dû avoir des conversations avec eux puis expliquer le tout. Vous apportez... c'est certain qu'on comprend. Là, je demeure aussi dans la nation. Ces augmentations de taxes-là affectent ma famille, affectent mes amis. C'est certain. C'est la même chose pour tous nos résidents. Puis ça, je pense que c'est important que vous compreniez ça. Est-ce que c'est quelque chose qu'on voulait? Absolument pas. Est-ce qu'on est fiers de le pourcentage qu'on a eu? C'est certain que le pourcentage est qu'est-ce qui est, mais qu'est-ce que je veux qu'on garde en tête, c'est que on est parti de 18,5 qui nous a été présenté. On est descendu à 8 plus le 1,5 de OPP. On a fait des coupures drastiques. Qu'est-ce qui avait été présenté à la table était, dans le fond, on en a fait des coupures. On est revenu, on a passé au moins 20 heures ici en salle, tout le monde ensemble, à travailler là, vraiment fort. Chaque département ont fait de leur mieux, puis on a apporté des idées à la table, ils nous ont rapporté des suggestions. On a fait des coupures du mieux qu'on pouvait avec ce qu'on avait. Mais je comprends votre point, puis je veux pas que vous pensiez que je suis pas en accord avec ce que vous dites. Puis oui, il faut avoir un plan à long terme, puis ça, je suis totalement d'accord avec vous, c'est là-dessus qu'on travaille. Mais c'est comme j'ai eu des conversations avec monsieur le maire, avec tous les appels que je recevais, puis avec monsieur notre directeur général. Et puis, dans le fond, là, chaque département, ils sont dans la position qu'ils sont parce qu'ils sont bons à ce qu'ils font. Ils ont travaillé extrêmement fort avec l'administration et avec leur staff pour trouver des solutions. On en a trouvé certaines. Est-ce qu'on les a toutes trouvées? On a vraiment fait de notre mieux, puis faire avec le budget qu'on avait, et puis qu'est-ce qu'on a, puis qu'est-ce qui a besoin d'être fait dans les prochaines années. Est-ce qu'on a fait des coupures? Absolument. On a coupé certains véhicules cette année. On a coupé beaucoup de choses au niveau de la récréation. On a coupé certaines routes que M. Legault voulait peut-être qu'on fasse cette année, mais on les a reportées. Alors, ces choses-là, je ne veux pas que vous... On en a fait certaines, le plus qu'on pouvait, je pense, mais on en a fait beaucoup. Une autre chose que j'aimerais aussi pointer, c'est que cette année, depuis 2024, dans le fond, on a établi un groupe pour faire des applications pour les grants qui est disponible. Alors, je pense que c'est quelque chose que j'aimerais pointer, que je suis fière que peut-être les taxes auraient été encore plus haut si on n'avait pas eu cet argent. On a reçu des bons montants cette année, puis on veut vraiment continuer de travailler cette année encore plus fort pour encore en avoir d'autres. Je pense qu'on a fait une vraiment bonne job, puis je veux juste les remercier d'avoir appliqué. Puis c'est sûr que certains, on en attend encore. Ceux-là pour la patinoire, comme on a mentionné, on les a pas encore reçus, on va les recevoir. C'est certain que ces choses-là vont nous aider pour les projets futurs. Mais je veux que vous sachiez qu'on est ouvert à des idées. Si jamais, tu sais, nos départements sont vraiment bons à ce qu'ils font, mais on a des résidents qui sont éduqués, on a des résidents qui sont intelligents. Si on a manqué quelque chose, s'il vous plaît, regardez le budget puis apportez-nous. On va être vraiment ouvert à le regarder. C'est quelque chose qu'on a eu comme discussion. Si on a manqué quelque chose, là, mais je peux vous dire, j'ai passé au moins 20 à 30 heures chez moi assis dans mon salon à aller regarder les lignes. Puis je pense qu'on a toutes fait la même chose. puis on les a aussi fait ici, au moins 20 heures ensemble. Mais si, s'il vous plaît, si j'ai manqué quelque chose, puis vous allez me dire, c'est pas votre job de faire ça, puis je comprends, mais ils l'ont déjà fait. Si on a manqué quelque chose, ça va me faire plaisir de vous représenter, puis qu'on va le montrer à nos départements, puis peut-être trouver une solution ensemble. On est ouvert à des options. Si on a manqué quelque chose, s'il vous plaît, ça nous affecte tous, puis on travaille en équipe depuis le début. Alors, honnêtement, je vous en prie, amenez-nous des idées si vous en avez. Vous avez été dans 6 municipalités. Peut-être qu'il y a quelque chose dans une autre municipalité qui pourrait peut-être fonctionner. Les idées, on est ouvert. Fait que je veux que vous sachiez que notre administration est super ouverte à avoir des idées. Sont innovateurs, on grossit rapidement, puis on essaie vraiment d'avoir des choses qui vont être stables pour nos résidents, mais aussi accueillantes. C'est pas nécessairement accueillant de s'en venir dans une municipalité, que les taxes montent comme ça. C'est un peu comme ça partout, mais on veut continuer de grossir. Puis, si vous avez des idées, apportez-les de l'avant, M. Gingras.
Merci. Je pense que c'est l'effet de surprise qui est
C'est
la
certain.
partie inacceptable.
Je vous le
qui
dis,
est
moi
vraiment
aussi. Là, quand
difficile.
j'ai vu ça,
Ouais,
non.
Parce que moi, sur la pétition, là, j'ai pas amené les commentaires, là, mais je peux vous les envoyer si vous voulez. Là. Il y a des gens qui ont mis des commentaires, là, une maman avec 3 enfants qui vit dans un bungalow, 2 chambres, puis qui reste 80$ à la fin du mois. Là, il n'en reste plus que 40.
Puis je le comprends, puis je
c'est
le vois à chaque
là,
jour, ça aussi.
C'est pas ceux-là qui font 6 chiffres qui sont le problème. Là.
Non.
C'est ceux-là qui font 40 000 par année. Eux autres, ils ont de la misère. Puis c'est eux autres qui ont signé la pétition, la plupart du monde. Puis je me suis promené dans toutes les wards pour distribuer des brochures pour la pétition. Puis j'en ai vu des maisons qui sont pas tombées en morceaux. Fait que, tout ce que je veux dire, c'est que la population, il y a beaucoup de populations qui ne sont pas riches dans vos wards. Je vous garantis ça tout de suite. Merci de m'avoir entendu.
Non, mais merci à vous,
Puis,
j'apprécie.
il y a 1200 personnes qui vont décider de leur vote aux prochaines élections. Finalement, que ça va aller. Merci.
Merci.
Mr. Gingras, if you have 2 minutes, I'd like to say a couple words. First off, I want to thank you and commend you for your service to this country. I mean that truly. Thank you for that service. I want to thank you and commend you for leading this initiative with this petition and these ideas. Truly, and it's not easy, and everybody's busy, and thank you for doing that. I just want to address something that it's been kind of bothering me a little bit, and not for any sympathy for me, but just to put it out there that there's this kind of conception maybe on the Facebook and from the emails I'm getting that council hasn't done the hard work, or council hasn't put enough thought into it, or council hasn't made the tough decisions on trying to bring costs down to keep the increases to an absolute minimum. So I just want to go over 4 examples of things that we've done here, and there's many more. There was many more, but I just want to go over 4 to kind of to give you an idea, maybe a little bit of where we're coming from. First example. So this is specifically about my ward. So I discussed, agreed to, and voted to close down my outdoor skating rink in my little town of Fournier. Okay? That rink has been there for 45 years. I know that because my father organized the community, raised the money, volunteered, built the rink, shoveled the snow, made the ice, organized the community to build change rooms and pumps and bring electricity, maintain the ice, volunteer, all volunteer for years and years and years. That a rink has been functioning as far as I know, and I spent thousands of hours there as a kid, so it means a lot to me. We voted to close that rink to save a few $1,000s. Okay, so not a big amount of money, but a very tangible item for a few $1,000s. Second item, something that affects Councillor Mayville's ward and my ward very directly. We discussed, voted on, and agreed to close a fire station. Probably saving about $1 million for a new truck. But we took not an easy decision, not in any way, shape, or form an easy decision. $1 million, but we closed the fire hall, okay? Very tangible, very real effects on people's lives. Example number 3 that affects Mr. Forg's ward, Mr. Mayville's ward, and my ward again, where we are downloading community halls down to volunteer committees. Hopefully, we can convince volunteer committees to take over ownership and management of 3 community halls. Very real, very tangible, very difficult decisions. I have laid awake many hours all night looking at the ceiling, wondering how we're going to make this work. Number 4, that affects the municipality as a whole. We voted on the first draft of this budget to reduce library funding by $200,000. Because of that decision, we had our Director General retire. We had our Board of Directors almost totally resign, which led to the closure of the 3 branches for 3 months. Hopefully, we can get them going after that 3 months, but another very real, very difficult, extremely tangible effect on our communities that I've lost a lot of sleep over as well, and I'm not looking for sympathy. This is what I signed up for. But I just want everybody to understand that we didn't just walk in here and say, yeah, that sounds about right. We're going to vote and we're going to go home. We've put a lot of thought. I feel terrible about a 9.5% increase. I'm having to explain it, try to explain it every day. This township has very, very, very little nice to have spending. And we've cut drastically into that nice to have spending. We are at a must do. We are mandated on every front, in every department, by the province to hold up certain standards. And we're barely holding on to those standards. There's a government in Ottawa that's printing $90 billion. It made up $90 billion this year. We have to have a balanced budget. We cannot print money. We can't run a deficit. We have to balance. So it's a whole different world at this level than it is at that federal level. We're trying. We're honestly, I don't know where else to cut. Is there a tiny cut here and there? Leased vehicles versus purchased vehicles, we're looking into it. It's not going to be something we can have on the budget for this year, but we're looking into it. Maybe there's a tiny savings there. But I just want people to understand that we feel it, we are trying our best, and we have made massive, significant, real-world, tangible cuts. So anyway, that's where I'm at. Again, thank you for your time, thank you for your initiative, and
Well, thank you,
appreciate it.
Councillor Stewart, for explaining that to me. What I would suggest about the comments on Facebook that you might have seen or picked up on, it's probably clear then that people in the nation, municipality, are not understanding what you guys are doing or not doing. So there might be a little bit of PR campaign to be done to explain how you're going about doing your things and how you're getting the message out, because obviously the message is not being received by all residents unless they specifically follow your council meeting or talk to a councillor directly. But there's a majority of people that are not seeing a lot of things or not aware of a lot of what's going on. And that's when I've had some people contact me about the petition. They're like, how come this is like that? How come is that like that? I would actually send them, I want to actually take a second to thank Aimé and Madame Langlois, Madame Roy, for sending me all the links and all the information, because I would take some of those and forward it to some of those people and say, well, go look at the budget at this page, that number, it's right there. That's how they came up with that number. So I think there's probably a little bit more to be done to inform the population on your efforts. And I don't question your efforts. I know you work hard. I know it's hard to manage all these things. I get it. But to go from 4.23 to 9.51, it's like you might as well just punch me in the face to give me the same effect. So all I'm saying is that this was quite a surprise to everybody. You maybe brought it down from 18 to 9. I get that. But there's a lot of residents that find this pill very, very difficult to swallow. And that's what I'm here to explain to you guys and to voice to you guys. What you do with it is totally up to you. You're the council. You're in charge. You've been elected. I'm passing on the message that there's around 1,200 people who are not happy with this budget. So we need to inform the people a bit more. give them a little bit more information on how you guys got there. Maybe have information sessions in your respective wards so people can actually come and sit down with you and ask questions. And one thing, I do appreciate the YouTube and everything, but for me, hiding behind a screen is not the way you communicate with people. It's face-to-face, shaking hands, knocking on doors, and having public meetings in your wards. So that would be, to me anyways, would be a lot more productive, I think, because nobody has time to go to YouTube and start watching things, or very few people do. But maybe I'm
Are you
wrong.
suggesting that we knock on doors, though?
No, but I'm saying that you know, you get out to the community and you get the word out to the community. There's a lot of people that don't even know their ward councillor. Some people came to me and asked me, said, who's my ward councillor? I'm like, okay, send them to the Nation webpage, look it up, you know, stuff like that. So
I understand, but
yeah.
like we do have like those all the sessions that we had, the 20 hours that we talked about, everything it was all pre-announced, and there was nothing that was hidden. It was
no.
transparent from the beginning. So, like, I understand there's a responsibility for us to bring as much information and but at a certain point, as a resident, you have to be involved, not till after the result is, you know what I mean? Like, the result this year is a horrible one, and I can echo Mr. Stewart. I've lost a ton of sleep over this. It's not a fun decision. It was never going to be fun, and you saw the previous that's going to keep me up for a long time now, knowing where we are with what we have.
I can tell you, don't sweat the AMD too much, because when I lived in the military, we had AMDs, and they never worked. I'm just telling you right now, because you always get something unexpected that hits you.
Right.
But no, thank you very much, Council, for your time. I don't want to take up more of your time. I understand you guys work hard, you do what you do, but I'm here to pass a message.
Yeah.
I've given you the message. What you do with it is in your capable hands, and I leave you with that.
Si je peux juste
Okay?
un dernier mot. Ben, je vous remercie moi aussi, puis j'aimerais vous relancer l'invitation que je vous ai fait à quelques reprises là, cet hiver, que vous êtes le bienvenu de m'appeler à n'importe quel moment, on peut s'asseoir ensemble. On va commencer les discussions budgétaires à l'automne prochain. Si vous voulez représenter, il y a des gens qui vous posent des questions. J'essaie le plus possible. En fin de semaine, j'ai rencontré beaucoup de personnes là, au centre, la fermeture du 150e. Je continue à être présent, mais c'est sûr que je ne peux pas parler à tout le monde. Mais si vous voulez, gênez-vous pas de m'appeler, ça me fait plaisir.
Merci encore. Just out of curiosity, there's a question from the crowd. Is that something that we take? Right.
On peut prendre une pause si vous voulez discuter avec eux.
Ouais, on va prendre une pause, puis monsieur, je vais répondre à ta question à ce moment-là, OK?
Alors, je nous mets en pause. Juste dans un instant. Par contre, on n'est pas en pause tout de suite. OK, on est de retour.
Welcome back. Bon. OK, Madame Roy, on est rendu où avec tout ça?
Alors, nous sommes rendus au point 8.1 concernant la deuxième ébauche pour la politique sur les dons, le Community Engagement Fund.
OK.
Donc, je crois que M. Mainville
Ouais,
avait
c'est
une
ça.
question.
Tu avais une question, M. Mainville.
Ben moi, je suis plus ou moins d'accord, mais il y a des raisons aussi. Je sais que c'est pas tous des gens de Saint-Isidore qui jouent au hockey, mais j'avais l'habitude de donner toujours un petit don pour le hockey mineur, et puis à ce que je peux voir, ce serait un des événements qui serait mis de côté.
Oui, donc, j'ai discuté avec mes collègues. Donc, les associations de sport ont été mises sur la liste des exceptions, simplement parce que, surtout, si on parle des ligues de hockey, ils sont déjà subventionnés, ils ont des rabais sur les prix de la glace. Donc, ça fonctionne un peu comme avec la location de salles dans cette optique-là. Et aussi, on voulait aussi être juste envers tous les autres sports aussi. Donc, à moins qu'on commence vous voulez donner des dons à d'autres sports comme le baseball ou le soccer ou peu importe, c'était simplement pour limiter le scope de la politique. Mais si vous voulez le retirer de l'exception et quand même donner des dons aux équipes sportives, on peut aussi. C'est ouvert à la discussion ce soir.
Ben moi, écoutez, je veux pas faire une exception, puis c'est vrai aussi, si on commence avec un, il faut en donner avec les autres. Mais c'est laissé au choix de tout le monde. Moi j'aimais ça en donner parce que c'est notre sport d'hiver, puis surtout à Saint-Isidore, mais...
Je vais dire une autre chose aussi, que je pense que c'est un problème assez qui est typique dans toute la région, comme, mettons, on utilise, comme les gens de la nation vont à Castleman. Ah ben, si Castleman supporte le hockey mineur de Castleman, dans le fin fond, ils donnent de l'argent à des non-résidents de Castleman. Fait que je pense que l'argument aussi peut être fait que il y a des jeunes de Wendover, je pense, jusqu'à Plantagenet, Lefebvre, qui jouent le hockey mineur à Saint-Isidore. Donc, à ce moment-là, on donne de l'argent à des non-résidents. Fait que je pense que c'est quelque chose à réfléchir. Donc, c'est encore un commentaire. Écoute, là.
C'est un petit peu ça aussi. Mais je comprends bien les affaires aussi. Je suis très d'accord aussi. Est-ce que c'est vrai qu'ils ont des prix avantageux?
OK. On veut-tu en discuter de l'avance?
Juste une petite question.
Ouais.
J'ai remarqué quelque chose, là, puis au niveau des clubs d'âge d'or.
Oui.
J'étais juste curieux parce que chez Saint-Albert, le club d'âge d'or a fermé il y a quelques deux ans passés. Et je vois que comme Saint-Bernardin, par exemple, c'est le comité consultatif de Saint-Bernardin. Je me demandais juste comment est-ce
Ils ont changé de nom. C'est un groupe, c'est ça. Majoritairement, c'est un club d'âge d'or. M. Stewart peut peut-être m'aider là-dessus. The Consultative Heritage. Oh, c'est quoi là, le titre? Je l'échappe. C'est le comité consultatif de Saint-Bernardin. Déjà, c'était un comité à club d'âge d'or, mais ils avaient changé de nom plusieurs années passées. Donc, c'est pour ça qu'ils ont changé de nom dans la politique. Je crois que c'était peut-être Mme Lanty à l'époque. Mais on peut la retirer de la liste aussi. On peut la
Moi, c'est pas
rester
pour
là.
enlever à un groupe, là, c'était plus pour voir au niveau de l'équité dans l'ensemble de la municipalité. Je vois qu'elle fournit quand même 2 clubs d'âge d'or. Là, Saint-Bernardin, il y a le comité consultatif, c'est super correct. Là, chez nous, à Saint-Albert, on avait, quand le club a fermé, on a juste enlevé les fonds. Fait que j'essaie juste de voir, c'est toujours quelque chose qui est comme nébuleux pour moi, cette donation-là automatique à des groupes, là, comme qui en a, qui en a pas. Là.
Yeah, I'm
Not sure.
I wouldn't want to comment exactly on which group that is.
Okay.
I'm not sure.
Peut-être M. Lafrance.
Yeah, so to jump in, they have their own group. They do like coffee on Saturday mornings. They do their own event in that little room beside Saint Bernardin. There's a small room, there's a big hall, and then le Club d'Âge d'Or, tel quel, they have their little room. So that's where they do their activities. It's just a name change. The same people that used to be there previous years, it's just a name change.
One little thing. When I was reading this, I really like that we do this year, like we implemented last year, that they have until the 30th of January or 31st of January, I think, for the first, ask for the donation. And then after that, it goes into June 30th, I believe. So it's twice a year, so we can manage our money better on where we're going to give. which I really like. But is it possible to, I feel like it was good last year, definitely better than the previous year I was here. But I feel like at the end I was still struggling to give them some stuff because I thought by July it was going to be done, but then it kept on coming in. So maybe can we pose that on
We try
groups?
to, in the past, we tried to do a lot of awareness campaigns to encourage them. We send them copies of the policies. And this year is a bit different because we were reviewing the policy. What we can do in the future is send them the policy again and encourage them, to
I think
submit
it's in their
on
own
time.
benefit, so that way
Exactly.
we can.
Oui.
In the end, if they apply in December and there's not a lot of monies left, then it's at their disadvantage. So yes, if ever, you can always refuse the donation once they get in, but if you want to still give, we can try to continue our awareness and reach out to every
I think
community
it's just
group.
in their own benefit, so
Yeah,
that
oh,
way
for
we
sure.
can. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you.
No problem. Est-ce qu'il y avait d'autres questions? Non, est-ce que nous sommes confortables à l'adopter ce soir comme tel?
Mhm.
Oui. Parfait. Alors, celui-ci va être adopté sur la résolution dans le point 11. Oh, oui, pardon. Ah oui, c'est vrai, on a plusieurs résolutions parce qu'il faut donner des dons. Oui, OK. Alors, je vais aller dans le premier. Be resolved that the Community Engagement Fund Policy, POLCL 1-2025, be adopted as presented effective January 1st, 2025, retroactively. Be it also resolved that Policy AD 2018-01 be hereby repealed. Proposed by.
Monsieur Boisvenu,
Parfait. Et
Monsieur Lalonde.
excellent.
Tous d'accord avec ça? OK.
Parfait. Le prochain, qu'il soit résolu que... faut que je l'agrandisse. J'ai pas assez de place. Que les clubs suivants pour l'année 2025 soient admissibles à une donation monétaire municipale conformément à la politique de fonds d'engagement communautaire, comme suit. Alors, les groupes d'âge d'or situés dans la municipalité de la Nation, le Club de bonheur Réveil Nation Area Seniors, le Club de Renaissance et le Comité consultatif de Saint-Bernardin. Combien voulez-vous remettre cette année?
C'est-tu 500 $ qu'on avait fait l'année passée?
Entre 3 ou 500. J'étais pas ici l'année passée.
Je pense. Ouais, je pense.
Cassandra avait 300. puis
C'est la moitié.
C'est
Ouais.
ça que je me. De mémoire, c'était ça.
Alors, 500 cette année. Est-ce que vous êtes...
Mhm.
Oui. Parfait. Le Club d'âge d'or, est-ce qu'on donne la moitié de 500 ou 300?
300.
300. Et ensuite, les clubs optimistes situés dans la Nation?
Je pense qu'on avait dit 500 $ aussi, eux autres.
Et le club d'optimistes?
Le
300.
Castlemine, je pense que c'était 300, c'est ça.
Alors qu'il soit également résolu que les 10 montants soient prélevés du compte de dons des comtés unis de Prescott-Russell. Alors, proposé par...
Monsieur Mainville, Monsieur Fogg, tous d'accord? Everybody agree? OK.
Et la dernière résolution, qu'il soit résolu que les groupes et les événements admissibles à une réduction de location de salles en 2025 conformément à la politique de fonds d'engagement communautaire soient les suivants. Alors, tous les soupers communautaires, le Limoges Recreation Committee, le regroupement autisme de Prescott-Russell, le groupe communautaire de Saint-Albert, historique et culturel de Saint-Bernardin, Cercle des femmes, et ainsi de suite. Vous l'aviez tout sur votre jour. Elle est pas mal longue, je dirais pas.
Non,
tout le
non,
long,
non.
là. Alors, proposé par...
Monsieur Boisvenu, Monsieur Stewart, tous d'accord?
Parfait, c'est tout pour celui-ci. Merci.
Bon. OK, je pense qu'on est rendu. Monsieur Stewart, notice of motion. Oh,
Je vois le club 4H de Prescott. Il est exclu ou inclus?
Je peux vérifier dans la liste. C'est inclus? Oui, c'est inclus.
C'est inclus, OK. OK, c'est bon.
OK, on est correct? OK. Mr. Stewart, would you like to speak to this? I think we all know. I mean, it's there on black and white. I think we'll bring it back next meeting, and then at this point, we'll go forward.
Yeah.
OK. 11,
Donc,
11.1.
c'était pour le point 8, mais il y avait juste un sujet, donc nous n'allons pas l'adopter séparément.
OK, fait qu'on est correct?
Oui.
Donc, on est rendu à l'ajournement, ce
Oui,
point-ci?
est-ce qu'il y a des annonces que les membres du conseil aimeraient faire pour leur quartier avant qu'on continue?
Dimanche, à Saint-Albert, c'est l'inauguration des bandes de la patinoire. Fait que si vous voulez venir, on va avoir on devrait avoir du froid et de la glace. Fait que ça va être le fun. Hein?
Oui.
Ça regarde bien.
Monsieur Boisvenu.
Wait, just like to mention that this weekend in Limoges, the Limoges Recreation Committee is putting together their Winter Fest. So I got a whole slew of activities. The schedule is online on their Facebook page, so too many articles to say at once here, but have a look at the Limoges Recreation Committee Facebook page, and you'll see all the great events that are going on in the Limoges community.
Parfait. Alors, c'est tout. Nous pouvons procéder avec le règlement de confirmation. Qu'il soit résolu que le règlement numéro, je ne l'ai pas ici, pour confirmer les procédures du Conseil à sa réunion ordinaire le 10 février 2025 soit lu et adopté en première, deuxième et troisième lecture.
Mr. Stewart, Monsieur Boisvenu, tous d'accord? Parfait.
Parfait. Alors, la prochaine réunion publique est celle qui est extraordinaire, mardi prochain, le 18 février. Alors, pour l'atelier de planification stratégique, la réunion va avoir lieu au Centre communautaire de Saint-Albert pour permettre un peu à la réunion de se tenir. Il y a beaucoup de dynamisme. Donc, malheureusement, elle ne pourra pas être diffusée sur YouTube, mais les gens sont bienvenus à assister en personne pour observer le déroulement de l'atelier. Ensuite, la prochaine réunion ordinaire se tiendra, comme d'habitude, le 24 février, ici, en salle du Conseil. Donc, tous les items étant découlés, l'ajournement est maintenant à 18h24 et la réunion est conclue.
Parfait. Merci tout le monde.
Merci.